Yeah, we're gonna go through the Dirshu Mishna Berura in the beginning of the halachas of Sirius Omer and Siman Tuf Pei Tes. The first sif is almost a quarter of the halachas of Sirius Omer, so just keep that in mind. We're gonna go through. They have around 40 notes. We're gonna highlight some of the main notes in a short period of time. We learned together in the Mishnah Berura that the sefira should be before Aleinu. That's what we saw. Sefira should be before Aleinu. And the reason for that is it's a completeness. And we're going to go into the explanations more of these Mishnah Berurahs, but we're just going to go through what the Dirshu says first. So the Dirshu footnote 3 says that this is immediately after the full Kaddish. So finish Shmona Esrei Ma'ariv, the Chazan, he goes into the full Kaddish, the Chok Yaakov writes, and then that closes off the Shmona Esrei that finishes it, and then immediately you count Sfira.
It's about that's what it's a woman book that's out.
Correct. Same idea over there. So there's so many notes over here that then they throw you to the back in the Maluim where they have a whole other section. They go into women counting, which we already covered, and then they say an interesting point in footnote 12. Someone who forgot and didn't count in the beginning of the night. Okay. So we learned together in the Shulchan Aruch, you can count the entire night. We're going to learn more about that. There's another sif in the Siman. However, there's a very important Kaf HaChaim in Sivkot and Yud Beis. Kaf HaChaim says, even though you could count Sfira the entire night with a bracha, nevertheless, you should not wait. When you remember, you should count it immediately. There's something called Zizin Makdim LaMitzvahs. You want to be quick to perform mitzvahs. Furthermore, there's a potential concern that one might forget to count Sfira. So, therefore, you shouldn't procrastinate that. It's another point from the Dirshu Mishna Berura.
It's like Friday night davening.
Correct, exactly. That's why I always, when I get home, I say Shema and then I count Surah. When I
Didn't
get
we
home,
learn a couple of years ago somebody said like they put something by their table? I forgot what
you
it was
could do
like
that. You could put a
Angie or
post-it.
well,
You put
they did
something
something
to
like for you
remind
to
you.
remember.
Yeah,
Like they did
that's a
something
good idea.
specifically.
It's a good idea
We
to
talked
remember.
about it.
Correct. The We're gonna move now the Shulchan Aruch and the continuation of the Siman, so that you need to count Sfiras Omer standing. So the Mishnah Berurah said you have to stand from the beginning of when the bracha is said. B'diavad, post facto, if you didn't do that, you'd still fulfill your obligation. But nevertheless, you should preferably stand. And we spoke out over there when we learned that Mishnah Berurah together that it's based on a pasuk me'achir chamrish b'kama al tukri b'kama el b'kama, and all mitzvahs are actually derived from this. Any mitzvah that you need to stand from is learned from Sfiras Omer, derived from Sfiras Omer. The Dirshu over here in footnote 26, quotes the Aruch HaShulchan, Oz Daled, quotes the Zohar, says that Sfiras Omer is so great, it's like Shemona Esrei, and therefore you need to stand. It's
Who said that?
Aruch HaShulchan quoting the Zohar. Yeah, something to think about, something incredible. By the way, everyone, if you didn't do Kiddush Levana already, you should try to do it. Keep that in mind. Footnote 25. They talk about whenever you say that something needs to be done standing or sitting, you always have to ask yourself a question. Is leaning considered like standing or sitting? So there's a general concept of smicha ki yeshiva dami, which means leaning is like sitting. Now, that only means if you're leaning on something to the extent if you would remove that which you were leaning upon, you would fall. That's when we say that leaning is like sitting. It's not sitting exactly, but it's better than standing in places where you halachically need to sit. And similarly, in the reverse way, if a person is standing and he's leaning on something, then you have to be careful if you're supposed to be standing. You see a lot of times in the Mishnah Berurah complains about this in the Lachas Shemona Esrei, that you see that sometimes the Chazan, he like leans on the stender where he's davening and he's going back and forth, and that you shouldn't be doing that because that has the status of sitting. Same thing basically with any mitzvah, and that would equally apply over here. So a person should make sure not to too much when he's counting sefira. If someone is older or sick and it's very difficult for them to stand, then certainly they could sit when they count sefira. It wouldn't be worse than Shmona Esrei, which, if necessary, could be done sitting. Simon Sadi Dawud, Mishnah Berura talks about the Sefkat and Chav. We discussed it there at length. Furthermore, in scenarios when you cannot stand, such as on a plane and the like, then you should be sitting. Okay, so that's the story over there. The Mishnah Berura in Sefkat and Ches commented on the Ramah, the Shulchan Aruch. The Ramah said Ba'omer 4 times. You should say Hayom Yom blah blah blah, and then you go to Ba'omer. The Mishnah Berura said in Sefkat and Ches that many poskim say you should say La Omer. So obviously, for those few people in the world who are very interested in diktuk and what the differences would be, there's a lot to discuss over here of why this would be. Mishnah Berura himself points out this is only preferable. In other words, what do you do lechachila? Either way, you would certainly fulfill your obligation. So over here in the Dirshu in footnote 30, they quote that in the Siddur of the Arizal, as well as the Vilna Gaon, custom of the Vilna Gaon, the Gra, and the Meiser Rav, Usamach Tes, you would say Ba'omer, not La'omer. Also, this is what the Chazon Ish would do as well. And the simple explanation of the Mishnah Berura that will come up later on in Sifkat and Chaf Aleph, as well as Lamed Beis, which seems like is different to what the Mishnah Berura over here is saying. Perhaps you could say, because Mishnah Berura here says, most poskim say that the custom is to say, most poskim say the nusach, is La Omer. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, quoted in the Shalmi Moed, Perek Pei Daled, page 440, Tough Mem, says that he would count twice, but he wouldn't tell others to do this. Meaning, he would count twice, one saying Ba Omer, one saying La Omer. Similarly, the Stipler in the Orchos Rabbeinu Chelik Beis on page 94 says count it a second time according to the second text. But there would be no benefit just to say La Omer and then Ba Omer. So you don't want to say Hayom Yom blah blah blah, Ba Omer, and then right after La Omer. No, you say Hayom Yom, then you say it, and then you say Ba Omer. Hayom Yom, and then La Omer. And when we learned this Mishnah Berura, I specified that this is what I personally do. Also, first I do the Ba Omer. I hold the Mekir Din. It's Ba Omer, and then I do it again La Omer. And you have nothing to lose by counting again because you're not saying a bracha. You're only saying one bracha, of course, and then you're just doing it again. So you have nothing to really lose by doing this over here. There's a major discussion, a halachic discussion. I'm surprised that the Dirshu Mishna Berura doesn't quote it over here. There's a well-known tshuva from Rabbi Yecheskel Landau, the Nod Yehuda, that he's very anti saying the L'Shem Yichud before Sefira. Well-known tshuva. It would take time to go through the topic and the reason to do it, to not do it, but you see specifically in Sefira, I once joked with one of my Chavros, says everyone gets very chassidish over here. They start saying all the L'Shem Yichuds. During the rest of the year, they don't. During Sefira, they do. Right? So the question is, the text in the L'Shem Yichud is L'Shem Yichud, etc. L'kayim mitzvah sa'ashrei shel Sefira sa'omer kimo shekasa b'Torah. You're saying I'm fulfilling a positive mitzvah as is written in the Torah. So many hold, which we have to delve into more on this sif that we're learning over here, that sefira is derabanan, and we'll cover that topic. We'll learn about that. So, if sefira is derabanan, merely from the rabbis, not the Torah, then how could one say in the L'Shem Yichud to fulfill this mitzvah sasi, this positive mitzvah sefira, like it's written in the Torah? You're saying that it's daraisa and it's not nowadays because we don't have the Korban Omer anymore, and we'll see more about that and all the details involved there. Even so, Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in the Halicha Shlomo on Pesach, Perek Yud Aleph, so he says there's no concern of Baal Tosef. It's not like you're adding. so to say. Right? You can't add a fourth item to the dollar minimum sukkahs. You can't add a fifth min. It's not like that. Even if you're gonna, even according to Rove, most poskim will say that sefira nowadays is derabanan. Why? When we say mitzvahs aseh, that could be referring to a mitzvahs aseh derabanan, a positive rabbinic mitzvah, which is a chiddush to say such a thing. It's truth of the matter is it's insight to say this. It's surprising because in the Shem Yichud it says l'kayim mitzvahs aseh shel sfiras omer kimoshe kasu b'Torah. So maybe you could say like it's written in the Torah to do when the base of Mikdash is around, different explanations. That's what he says in the next line. That which he says, like it's written in the Torah, that means that the rabbis enacted this mitzvah like it's written in the Torah. However, Shaul and Shuvas Or L'Tzion, Abatzion Ben Shaul, Kali Gimel Vaji Yosef, Kili Gimel Perik Tazayin Shuva Beis, writes that it is better not to say this text in the L'Shem Yichud. Rather, you should just simply say L'Kayim Mitzvah Sfiras Omer. But you don't say Kimoshe Kasa B'Torah. Nevertheless, says the Or L'Tzion, someone who does want to say this text of L'Kayim Mitzvah Aseh, Kimoshe Kasa B'Torah, could do this. Since the Rambam holds that nowadays Sfira is in fact from the Torah. So that is a basic discussion about the potential issue of the text of L'Shem Yichud. Again, they don't quote the tshuva from the Nod of Yehuda though. So the Dirshu then follows up on the closing Mishnah Berura of this sif. Says that the Achronim say if you said in another way, for example, he says on the 39th day, you said Hayom Arba'im Chasar Achas. Today is day 40 minus 1. Would you fulfill your obligation or not? So the Mishnah Berura said yes, you would, which is interesting. I wonder if Mishnah Berura chose 40 minus 1 because we have the 39 malachas of Shabbos, and it says over there 40 minus 1. And also when it comes to former Chabur member right over here.
Wow.
That's it. He's graduated. Now he's a big boy. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we have 40 minus 1 by the Malchus, right? Lashes, and by the Malachas of Shabbos. I wonder if that's why Mishnah Berurah chose. But nevertheless, if you said on day 39, today is day 40 minus 1, says the Mishnah Berurah, you to fulfill your obligation. So let's say, Dirshu says on the last day, you said today is the last day of the Omer.
No number.
But no number. No number. You didn't say 40 minus 1, you just say it's the last day. Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in that scenario wants to say that you would not fulfill your obligation, actually, if you did that in the Halicha Shlomo Pesach, Perik Yud Sev Daled, because you didn't say any number. Meaning the case in the Mishnah Berurah, he said 40 minus 1. So that's basic math. That's a number involved. As opposed to over here, you didn't say a number. You just said it's the last day. Also, of Yosef Shalom Elyashiv Zatzal, it's quoted in the Siddur Pesach Hil Chosach Hilik Beis Perik Yud Sevav, who says if you say today is the last day, or if you wouldn't fulfill your obligation. He actually also says, let's say it was 5 days before the last day, and you said today is 5 days before the last day, that wouldn't be good. Because you need, anytime you do addition or subtraction, you need two numbers involved, right? So therefore it wouldn't work because you didn't say a number. It's like, on Excel. So when you program something in Excel, it's amazing what it could do, all the math for you, but you need digits, you need numbers. You can't say the last day minus 5. It doesn't work. Okay. There's a few very interesting ber halachas that we must cover. We're just gonna go out of order right now, just so that we could get the completion of these notes in the Dirshu, so to say. There's an interesting closing ber halacha on this sif. I'm gonna screen share it. First, we're gonna see the Ber Halacha inside, and then we will relate what the Dirshu says, just so we could get the completeness of the Dirshu today. We'll see the Ber Halacha inside. The Ber Halacha this is right about the end of Sif Aleph, closing off the Sif says something very interesting. He says, Moina v'haylech, and I'm going to zoom it in for everyone. Moina v'haylech. Ayim b'achronim. Okay. Shenechlaku be'imana b'roishi tevos kagon shamar hayom beis yamim v'kedoyme im yatz. Okay. Kos v'choik Yaakov, the kivan shel rova poskim, ikir sfir bezman azeno l'derabani, mahach mir misveika v'yachzer lispar b'li bracha. Let's say a person just said, today is hayom beis, something, you know? He wants to say you'd be fine. True nowadays is Pinnick, you don't need to be stringent on a doubt. If you do want to count again, do so without a bracha. And then he says something very interesting. Certainly, if a person counted sefira in his heart, it was mentally, he didn't verbalize, nothing was verbally done. Person mentally counted sefira, he would not fulfill his obligation at all, because thinking is not like speaking. Think also pri chodesh lahedjes sefav, chodesh writes explicitly in sefav. Vayin le'al simin samach beis sif dalar b'Mishna Berura b'ber halacha sham v'duk. And look earlier in simin samach beis sif dalar. What happens in simin samach beis sif dalar over there? What's that talking about? What they're talking about over there is someone who is sick or has a extenuating circumstance and he can't speak. I know someone who recently underwent a surgery because the volume of the speech was very, very, very low. And after the surgery, it wasn't possible to speak for like a week. Yeah. And then finally the speech came back. So says the Mishnah Berura over there in Siman Samach Beis, you should think about Shema, think about the davening that you need to do. It doesn't count. It doesn't count. Because you're allowed Kedibur Dami. Which, by the way, is the opinion of Rav Chizdun, the Gemara and Brachos on Chof Amud Beis. Okay. Ravina argues and says, here a Kedibur Dami. Thinking is like speaking. So what's the point of thinking if you don't fulfill the obligation? Rather, since you have an extenuating circumstance, and Hashem realizes that Hashem will reward you that you tried. And then once the inability to speak gets removed, once you're able to converse again, to talk, then you're obligated to repeat Shema, if it's still within the time, of course, right? So there's basically a major discussion that comes up around 10 places in Orach Chaim. Thinking is like speaking or not. You have the Mishnah Berura and Siman Mem Zayin, Hilchos Birchos HaTorah discusses it. And the question would be if you say Birchos HaTorah, and then after you think about Torah, that you didn't say it, would that work or not? So preferably he says that you should say it. You have another place in Siman Samach Beis. In all these places, Mishnah Berura holds, you're allowed Kedibur Dami, like this Beralach over here. Thinking is not like speaking. Okay? So that's thinking. We posed a question on 2 sessions ago. We were learning halacha, which is if a person writes, today is such and such and sphere, such and such a day, would he fulfill his obligation counting? Certain Gedolim, when they would write letters during sphere, they would always write the day. So the question is, would that work or not? In other words, we're adding a third level. We know that for sure, Dibur is Dibur. When you talk, that's good. We established that thinking is not like talking, that's no good. What about in the middle? Do we say ksiva kedibur dami or ksiva lav kedibur dami? So Gemara actually talked about this, but Karla guy, second paragraph towards the beginning. Gia, Karla, Gia.
Didn't we say something about this yesterday?
Yeah, 2 sessions ago we posed the question. The Ber
What-
Halacha and Simon Mem Zayin over there asked this question regarding a sofer. Could a person say Birchas Torah and then write? And that counts as learning. Does he need to verbally say something? So we already know our custom is to say etc. We do that, and the custom is to do that based on you get Tanakh, you get also Gemara in there, Mishnah, you get everything in there. Fine. Let's say you didn't do that. Would it work? So the Be'er Halacha basically recommends against doing that and says if you would do that, you should just read while you're writing to get out of this question in terms of Birchas Torah. It's another question also. If you're getting paid to do something and you're not really thinking about it as learning, would that count as Torah as well? Right? I don't want to tangent too much to Hilchos Birchas Torah, but Mishnah basically concludes, Paskins, that if you're davening and it's within the time of davening, the Shema wouldn't count as Torah, even though it's from Chumash, it's from Torah. It counts as davening, right? So same thing with the sofer. Maybe you could say, then if you extend it, in the davar sof, someone's giving a shir, he knows the material already. Like how does it count as Torah? For sure, that counts as Torah, though, right? The sofer could be a little different because you're not really learning from that. Right? But anyways, the Dirshu over here discusses this over here. And in footnote 43 says regarding writing. So he quotes the Mishnah Berura and Simon Mem Zayin Sefkat and Dal that we said by Birchas Torah, writing down Torah. Some say it's like speaking ksiva kedibur dami because it's a ma'isa, there's an action, as opposed to here you're just thinking, there's no action, it's all going on in your head. But some say that writing is kihira dami. It's like thinking, and therefore the Mishnah Berura concludes with lamaisa one should be machmir, that the day one should be stringent, and assume that writing has the status of thinking. Ksiva kedibur dami. Baruch HaShulchan, in those tests, in our Siman quotes the Shari Tshuva, also Sifkat and Aleph over here who discusses this, says that even those who hold that ksiva is kedibur dami, that writing is like speaking, that's only in a situation where the purpose of the writing is to reveal the thoughts in one's heart. Conversely, in a situation, let's talk about a situation in where that mitzvah itself is the speech. For example, Shema, the whole mitzvah da'araisa of Shema is the dibur or tefillah. So then for sure, if you would write down Shema or Shemona Esrei for some reason, that would count as thinking. And that's why someone who counts sefira, when he's writing, by writing it would not fulfill his obligation, even if he had in mind to do it as a mitzvah. Why? Because the whole mitzvah itself is the speaking, is the dibur. And therefore, someone who writes down the day of sefira would actually have to recount with a bracha. Wouldn't count it at all. Look at Charles Chubas Rabbi Akiva Eger. It seems like it's not implied that way from him, which is interesting. There's a story that the Biur Halacha relates, Tanina, page Reish Lamed Ches, that the stipler needed to write a letter during Sefira. And it was always the stipler's norm to write the day of Sefira during Sefira. But he didn't count yet. So he made sure before he wrote the letter to count Sefira in order to get out of the Shiloh. Because the stipler was stringent and said, I don't even want to write the day of sefira before I count on the side that it would count, and then maybe I shouldn't be saying a bracha after. So that's something to think about, to be stringent, not to write the day of the sefira once it's, of course, already after Plaga Mincha at night until you count sefira. So that is basically a summary of the notes that the Dirshu has on our sif. Okay. With the remaining few minutes that we have, it would be a bad thing to end early and learn less Torah. So even though today was officially a Dirshu day, we're going to learn the Be'er Halachas also. The first Be'er Halacha discusses something interesting. The Mora Uksiya writes, Kosav Mora, the Sefer Mora Uksiya, Betam, the Sefer Nachar Tefillah. Why do we count after Ma'ariv? Sefira. Why not before? Mishum de Bedoiros had Rishonim Hayah Minog Lispal Arvis Koidim Alayla. In the earlier generations, they would daven Ma'ariv before 3 stars came out, before Seisel Chochavim. Besiyam Ma'ariv Eschila Halayla. The Az Hayu Seifim Kedin B'Techilas Halayla. When Ma'ariv concluded, the night began. And they would count Sefira then according to Halacha in the beginning of the night. In other words, according to the Mora Uksiya, the whole reason why we count Sefira after Ma'ariv is because once upon a time it used to be too early to count, and therefore we always count after. Now, what's the obvious comment on this? The obvious comment on this is, wait a second.
How long was their Mara?
Forget about that, but let's say nowadays someone's davening 9:30 Ma'ariv.
Yeah.
Okay. According to this, he counts Sefira first. B'chok Yaakov. However, the Chok Yaakov is a Sivkatan Tezayin says, Kosav de Medina Sorach Lahaktim Kriya Shema Tefillah Shu Tadir. No. Mikra Adin from the letter of the law. First you have to say Shema and then Shmona Esrei before Sefira. Why? Because they're more common. And we know from the 8th parak in Brachos, Tadir V'She'ina Tadir, Tadir called them. What's common proceeds. So say, wait a second. If that's true, ask one of my chavrusas, if that's true, Tanur V'She'ina Tadir Kodem, the common proceeds, so then why don't you do Sefira before Aleinu? Why do we do Sefira before Aleinu? Aleinu should come before Sefira. Aleinu is more common. So what? Neither is Sefira. Like we'll see in the next Be'er Halacha, according to many, Sefira is D'Rabbanan.
Alainu's in Kabbalah Shemaim, it's in Mitzvah.
So what? Sefira, you're not being Makabel Machu Shemayim.
Yeah, but it's a Mitzvah D'Rabbanan.
Okay, Mitzvah D'Rabbanan, yeah. That's a simple answer that I gave. All right? But if we scroll over here to the Mishnah Berura that we learned, you count Sefira before Aleinu. Why? The Kolma de Efshar Lagdume Makdiminun Kadeshi is Kaim Yosim Ashakos Trimasiyen. The earlier you could do Sefira, the better, as long as it's after the proper time. Right? To get a completeness. Completeness. What does that mean, completeness? You're in a completeness of 7 weeks, 49 days. And now, if you're going to count Sefira later on, so now you're not getting a completeness of that day. Now, really, you could say certainly the first and last day this applies to. You want to get a completeness. But this is saying an insight that each day has a certain completeness, and therefore there's another reason on top of the Kaf HaChaim that we learned today to get a completeness over here.
That's why I guess when we done Mincha Ma'ariv early, you say Aleinu first. You have to do before it says.
Yeah, now it's going to be the next point, actually.
Sorry.
So, no, on the contrary. So, if you're doing it too early, then you want to, get as close to 3 stars come out as possible. And that's a whole discussion, even counting there in the first place. But that's going to be Sif Beis and Gimel.
So I think the Sfarim always count after, I don't know why.
Yeah, so there's what to look into there. This basically is, for Ashkenazim.
Mhm.
But the all every like I said, this sif has 10 different
Not sure.
subjects in it. It's jam-packed. It's very difficult to learn something like this so in depth when you're looking at so many different svarim, just because there's so many different topics. It's the best way to do it really is to isolate each topic
Mhm.
and go through every single source at the same time on that. But all right, we'll get there. Anyways, okay, so Mitzvah Hashem tomorrow we will continue. We'll try to see if we can wrap up
Okay.
the Sefal of today. I mean, we pretty much looked at a lot. We didn't look at those the Mishna Berura, but we'll see how many insights are worthwhile to go
Okay.
through there. All right, so everyone have a wonderful day. Bruchim too.
Did you ever hear talk about
Uh,
the kadosh? You're supposed to be sitting for
At the Kadosh, where
by, let's say, by the shops of all the
you're supposed to stand,
This is the Machlokas.
not sit. No, stand.
Did he know on the
Stand,
kadosh?
stand. Whole thing. Look back at
For
this.
what?
We did. What simon was that? Simon Reish. It was after. It was after Shalosh. Reish Sadi something.
Well, it's like
Right? It was in between. It's Reish Sadi Aleph probably. It was before Shin. It's
Okay.
explicit. You got to stand.
All
Okay.
right.
Have a good day. Yep.
Good day.